Join me and learn how to make this fantastic crocheted scarf. It's super easy, a great project for beginners. Let's get started. So I've just added a fringe on the bottom here. You could add pom-poms on the bottom. And what I've done is I've made it stripy. And I want to show you how to put the tassels on, but also how to avoid having to sew in loads of ends when you're making a stripy scarf. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you how to do this, making a smaller version of this. Now, you don't have to use 3 colours like I have here. You can use 2 or you can use more. It's all using a US half double crochet, a US half double crochet or a UK half treble. I've got 3 greys here. Looking at these, I think I'm just going to do it with 2. It's exactly the same whether you do it with 2 or 3, but let's start off with 2. This chunky yarn is so lovely for crochet. It's got a really, really good, neat twist. So the stitches look really lovely in it, and it's super wash. So if you make yourself a sweater or something in it, you can just pop it in the washing machine, and it's really easy to use. So I'm going to start off with the light grey here. And the basis of this, now you need a 5.5mm hook or a 6mm hook with this chunky yarn, but we start off with a slip knot, and then we're going to make a chain. Now the number of chains that you create will depend on the size of scarf you want to make. Now to make that nice long scarf over there, I used 150 chains. That sounds daunting, but it's truly not when you get going. You'll see how big the chains are and you'll see how it goes. So I'm going to make, a 20 chain version now with us. To make a slip knot, put the yarn over your hand with the tail hanging down. Bring it over the top like that, and then bring the tail through the hole and pull. There are loads of ways of making a slip knot, and you'll do whichever one you prefer. That's how I do it. And tighten it up, and then to make a chain, if you're a beginner, bring the yarn around the hook and then pull through the loop. Yarn around through the loop. Yarn around through the loop. And so when you're making a chain for a scarf, just carry on making chains until it feels long enough. For the one that I've made there, I used 150 chains, and I used probably 2/3 of the balls of yarn. So there was enough yarn left to make pom-poms if you wanted to. So I'm just going to make a scarf, a miniature scarf, just that long for the purposes of this. So the first thing we do is we're doing two rows of each colour. So I'm going to start off with a half double crochet US or a half treble UK. So I'm going to do my first half double crochet or half treble into the third chain from the hook. So there's 1, 2, I'm just looking at the third one there. So yarn around the hook, put your hook into the third one and pull up a loop, yarn around, and then pull through all 3 loops. Okay, so we do that into all the chains working down the scarf. Yarn around into the chain, pull up a loop, so you've got 3 loops on the hook, yarn around, pull through all 3, yarn around into the loop, into the chain, pull up a loop, yarn around and pull through all 3. Now this is probably what takes the most time when you're making this scarf, is going into the chain, because once you've got stitches to go into, it'll speed you up no end. So yarn around into the chain, pull up a loop, yarn around, back through all 3. So I'm going to keep working into my chain until I go all the way down to the other end, and I shall meet you there. So I've worked in half double crochets, half trebles, the UK, half double crochets for the US, all the way down until the very last stitch, and this is where we're going to change colour. So I'm going to yarn around, go into that very last stitch, pull up a loop, very last chain I should say, pull up a loop, and then instead of pulling through with the light grey that we have here, I'm going to change my colours, but I'm not going to cut the yarn. So I'm just going to get the new grey, just pick up, don't need to do anything fancy, just pick up that yarn and use the new grey, the new colour, to come through the end of the stitch. Then I'm going to chain 2 in the new colour and turn the work around. Now let these ends just fall and you're still connected to the light grey, which is absolutely as we want it to be. Now we're going to work 2 rows in the darker grey, and this time we're working into the stitches. So if you remember, you yarn around, we're going to go into the stitch rather than the chain this time, pull up a loop, yarn around, pull back through 3. If you're new to crochet, don't worry about having to hold the stitches and hold your yarn. I quite often will hold the stitches down while I pull through those 3, because sometimes it's just makes things a bit more secure if you get a chance to sort of hold the yarn while you're pulling the loops through, because it just steadies your hands a little bit. So I'm working all the way down. Now imagine at this point 150 stitches. That sounds a lot, but I promise when you get going it's super fast. Here we go. So we're coming down to the bottom of the next of our dark grey shades. There are loads of colours in Paintbox Simply Chunky, which is just an acrylic yarn if you don't want to have wool. So I've just got to the end of the last stitch. The reason I'm stopping at these last stitches is to make sure you get to the end, because you don't want a scarf that's going to have a wonky edge. So pull through, that's the last stitch, and we're going to do 2 chains and turn and work our way back. So we work all the way back. And you'll find as well, as soon as you've got a bit more actual scarf in your hands, it's easier to hold the work and work all the way across. Right, so we're now coming back to the beginning of the row, and we're going to change colour again. And this time we're going to change back to the original grey. And we're going to do what we did before. We're not going to finish the stitch. So we put the hook in, pull up a loop, and instead of pulling through the last bit with the dark grey, I want you to pick up the original grey, which is this one down here. And you know that it's still connected to your scarf because we didn't snip it off. And so we're actually going to hold it up and pull it through that last stitch. Now, we work this way and you'll see that what you're doing is carrying a long thread of the yarn up the side of the scarf. And because we're doing that, I'm going to chain 2 and then turn and then work along the row in exactly the same way, half double crochets. We're holding those yarns at one end. If you notice, the more you work on this scarf, that you've got an end that has end of the scarf that has yarn hanging out of it and an end of the scarf that doesn't. And so you make sure that you do your colour changes at the same time, all the ways at the same end. So if you add in another stripe, which I did on my original scarf, of 3 colours, you'll just get a few more loops like this appearing at the end of the scarf. But don't worry, because what we're going to do when we get there is we're going to put tassels on over the top of those ends. So you won't see any of this when we put this on. So don't worry, this is why it's such a great scarf to work up quickly, because you haven't got hundreds of different ends and bits and bobs to sew in, just a couple of ends. So I'm just working my way along, and you can work this way, keep going with your stripes until the scarf is as deep as you want it to be. My purple and pistachio scarf here, I worked 2 sections of each colour. So I started off with the ivory, 2 pistachio, 2 lilac, 2 cream, pistachio, lilac, and then just 1 row of the cream on the end. So that's not a particularly wide scarf. You could go wider than that if you wanted to, but it's entirely up to you. You can make it your own. So I will be back to talk to you when I've made this a little bit wider, and we'll talk about tassels. Here's my swatch. You can see at the colour change end, these are my carried yarns where I've just carried the yarn up, and this is the last of the darker grey. Because I wanted just a single row at the end here, like to match this, I've got the yarn ending at this end. So I'm going to snip that off there, snip off the balls there. I'm going to snip that one off there. And always really important to leave a fairly longish tail. Not sort of one like that, leave it this long, so that you can weave in the ends and they disappear. So I'm just going to pull that through on that side and then just show you quickly how to weave in an end if you haven't done this before. So thread your tapestry needle and then just weave the end back a couple of stitches and then go back the other way. Just weave it in somewhere along the line in the same colour, and if you weave it in both directions it won't come loose. There are lots of people who weave ends in underneath the stitches. I'm a bit of a fan of weaving them in and really stitching them in, because the last thing you want to happen is for them to come loose and stick out. I'll just trim that off. So that's nicely sewn in, and then we'll sew these in, and then I'm going to show you how to work the tassels. So we have our scarf swatch. So imagine that that is 150 chains long, and we're ready to put the tassels on the end. Now remember, this is the end, and you can see on the wrong side here where you can see the loops, and as I promised, these are going to be covered up. So to make the tassels, what you need to do is to think how long you want the tassels to be, say that long, and then double it. This is not very scientific. I'm not telling you a measurement, because you can work out exactly how long you want them to be, but each strand you make has to be double. So once you get the first length right, then take your yarn and, using this one as a measure, cut a few of the same length. So you've got groups of 2, or if you're doing 3 colours, you've got groups of 3. Just cut the same length and lie them down there, ready to attach. And we're going to put, I'm going to put tassels at both ends here. So this is how we put our tassels on. Now I'm going to say where you can see these stitches that we carried, this yarn that we carried, that's the wrong side. So with the right side facing you, take your folded up tassel like that, and I'm going to put my hook in and pull the 2 strands of the tassel just through into a scarf. You just find a hole, and when you've got a nice loop like that, reach through, grab the strands and then pull. So I'm going to do that again. So I fold the piece of tassel in half. You can easily sort of decide on where you're going to sit the tassels. I like to sit them just 1 stitch in. Pull them through. Oopsie. And put your finger in. So there's your little tassel. Open it up a bit and pull through. Wrap me around for the camera. So we're going to go fold it in half. Put your hook in. If you like, just put your hook through those 2 loops there. I'll do it this way. and make sure you've got the ends held together so that they're going to be the same length. Pull it through into the fabric like that, and you've got a little hole there. Reach through and pull that. You can see these tassels emerging. Now you work like that all the way along, and you'll see that it just covers where you've got those extra loops where you've changed colour. It just covers those up. And then when you've put all your loops and strands in, smooth it out, take your scissors and then just trim along so that they're all the same length. It's probably not a good angle for me to be doing this on a piece of paper flat, but you can see, just trim them so that they're all the same length. One thing I would say is when you're making these tassels, always make sure that you've got one left. If you want to put more in, you need to know exactly how long to make it, depending on how long you've decided in the beginning. So, and if you wanted to, you can make monster tassels, have more than 2 strands and pull them together so it's nice and big. So you might choose to have fewer but bigger tassels, but just work these all the way down. So then what you end up with, whoopsie, is here is my bigger scarf, and I've just put tassels all the way along, and they look just lovely, and it covers up all of your colour changes. So that is how we make a stripy tasselled scarf. So now you've learned how to do these fantastic fringes and make lots of scarves for all your favourite people. What colours are you going to make? Who are you going to make them for? Don't forget to leave me a comment and like and subscribe for lots more tips, techniques and gorgeous projects. Happy crochet!